The most terrifying secrets are not the ones people hide from you. They are the ones they quietly carry while pretending everything is normal. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for 15 years I believed I knew my husband better than anyone else in the world. Ethan and I had built what most people would describe as a good life together in Charleston, South Carolina. We owned a beautiful home near the water, shared the same circle of friends, and spent our weekends attending community events, exploring local restaurants, or simply sitting on the back porch watching boats move across the harbor. From the outside, we looked like one of those couples who had figured everything out. The truth was more complicated. Every marriage contains things left unsaid. Mine contained one secret I never planned to tell anyone. Not Ethan. Not my friends. Not even myself if I could avoid it. That secret belonged to another chapter of my life, one I had carefully locked away years ago. For a long time I convinced myself the past was exactly where it belonged. Then Ethan disappeared. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, while I was finishing paperwork at the accounting firm where I worked. A state trooper informed me that Ethan's rental car had been found abandoned near a highway rest area nearly 80 miles from his scheduled business meeting. His wallet was still inside. His luggage remained untouched. His phone had stopped transmitting a signal sometime during the previous evening. No one could explain what happened next. At first I assumed there had been a mistake. Ethan was organized, predictable, responsible. People like him did not simply vanish. Yet as hours turned into days, the reality became impossible to ignore. Search teams found nothing. Security footage revealed very little. Every update from investigators raised more questions than answers. Friends arrived with casseroles and sympathetic smiles. Family members called constantly. Reporters even began contacting me after local news stations picked up the story. Through it all I tried to remain calm. I answered questions, organized documents, repeated timelines, pretended I was stronger than I felt. But every night after everyone left, the silence inside our house became unbearable. 3 weeks after Ethan vanished, I found myself standing alone in his home office. It was a room he rarely allowed anyone to use. Not because he was secretive. He simply preferred having a quiet place to work. I had entered the room countless times before, yet that evening something felt different. Perhaps I was searching for answers. Perhaps I was searching for him. While sorting through financial records, I noticed a section of shelving that seemed slightly misaligned. Curiosity got the better of me. After moving several binders, I discovered a concealed compartment built into the wall. Hidden inside was a small black safe. I stared at it for several seconds. My pulse immediately quickened. Ethan had never mentioned a safe. Not once in 15 years. There were no labels. No instructions. No explanation. Just a digital keypad waiting for a code. I remember placing my hand against the cold metal surface and feeling a strange sensation I could not explain. For the first time since Ethan disappeared, I was absolutely certain of something. My husband had left this safe behind on purpose. And somehow, whatever was locked inside it was connected to a truth I was not prepared to face. For the next several days, the safe consumed nearly every thought I had. During the day, I answered calls from investigators and reassured worried relatives. At night, I returned to Ethan's office and stared at the keypad, as if it might eventually reveal its secrets on its own. I began with the obvious possibilities. Our wedding anniversary. Ethan's birthday. My birthday. The address of our first apartment. Important business dates. Every code I could imagine resulted in the same cold error message. After a week of failed attempts, I became convinced that Ethan had chosen the number carefully. If he intended for me to open the safe, then the answer had to be something I would eventually recognize. That realization changed the way I approached the problem. Instead of guessing numbers, I began searching through Ethan's office for clues. His desk drawers contained tax records, insurance documents, and years of neatly organized paperwork. Everything appeared normal until I noticed a pattern. Several folders had small colored tabs attached to their corners. Ethan had never used colored tabs before. Curious, I laid the folders across his desk. Blue, green, yellow, red. 4 colors repeated throughout different years and different categories of documents. At first the arrangement seemed random. Then I noticed that the highlighted dates all pointed to specific months. None of the dates connected to our marriage. None connected to Ethan's career. Somehow they all seemed to circle around a period from nearly 18 years earlier. My stomach tightened immediately. 18 years earlier was a chapter of my life I rarely allowed myself to revisit. Back then I was not married. Back then I had been living in Atlanta. Back then Rachel Parker had been part of my life. Even thinking her name felt strange after all these years. Rachel and I had shared a connection that ended long before Ethan entered the picture. We had gone our separate ways. Eventually I met Ethan, built a new life, and convinced myself the past belonged in the past. Yet as I sat alone in that office surrounded by Ethan's carefully arranged clues, I could not ignore the growing sense of unease. Why would dates connected to that period appear throughout his records? The possibility seemed impossible. Ethan could not have known. At least that was what I had always believed. A few days later another clue appeared. While sorting old financial statements, I found a receipt tucked inside a binder. It was from a bookstore in Savannah. The purchase date immediately caught my attention because it matched one of the highlighted months. Written across the bottom in Ethan's handwriting were 4 words. Some stories never disappear. I stared at the note for nearly a minute. Ethan was not the type of man who left cryptic messages. Everything about this felt deliberate. That night I returned to the safe once again. Rain tapped softly against the office windows while the digital keypad glowed beneath my fingers. I entered several more possibilities without success. Frustration slowly gave way to exhaustion. Then a memory surfaced unexpectedly. Rachel's birthday. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the thought. There was no logical reason to try it. None at all. Yet the feeling refused to leave. My heart began pounding as I entered the numbers one by one. For a brief second nothing happened. Then a mechanical click echoed through the room. The lock disengaged. Frozen in place, I stared at the safe door slowly opening. And resting on top of everything inside was a photograph that should have been impossible for Ethan to possess. My hands were shaking before I even picked up the photograph. Deep down, I already knew what I was looking at. The image had been taken nearly 19 years earlier on a summer afternoon in Atlanta. Rachel Parker and I stood together outside a small coffee shop that no longer existed. We were smiling at something beyond the frame, completely unaware that the moment would one day return to haunt me. I had not seen that photograph in almost 2 decades. In fact, I had believed every copy had been destroyed long ago. Yet there it was, resting inside my missing husband's secret safe. For several seconds I could do nothing except stare. Then I turned the photograph over. Ethan's handwriting covered the back. The message was short. Some truths survive even when people try to bury them. A chill moved through me. The office suddenly felt smaller, quieter, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to understand something. Beneath the photograph sat a thick envelope. My name was written across the front. Not in Ethan's everyday handwriting, but in the careful script he used when something mattered deeply. I opened it slowly. Inside were copies of documents, travel records, receipts, and printed emails. None of them were dramatic by themselves, but together they painted a picture I never expected to see. Ethan had been tracking pieces of my past for years. Not obsessively, not aggressively, methodically, patiently. There were hotel receipts from cities Rachel had lived in after leaving Atlanta, news articles mentioning organizations she worked with, public records showing addresses and professional licenses, dates highlighted in yellow, notes written in the margins. The oldest document was nearly 10 years old. 10 years. I sank into Ethan's office chair, unable to process what I was seeing. My husband had known something. Maybe not everything, but far more than I ever imagined. The question that immediately followed was even worse. How long had he known? I continued sorting through the contents. Near the bottom of the envelope I found a small notebook. It contained observations written over several years. None of them sounded angry. None sounded resentful. If anything, the tone felt thoughtful, curious, reflective. That frightened me more than anger would have. One entry stopped me cold. The hardest part is pretending not to know what someone is afraid to tell you. I read the sentence 3 times. Ethan had written it 6 years earlier. Another note appeared several pages later. People carry old versions of themselves long after everyone else has moved on. My chest tightened. Every page felt like a conversation Ethan and I had never actually had. Around midnight, I discovered a second envelope hidden beneath the notebook. This one contained only a single piece of paper. On it was an address in Savannah, Georgia. Nothing else. No explanation. No instructions. Just an address. I immediately recognized the location. Years ago, Rachel and I had visited Savannah during a long weekend trip. The address belonged to a bookstore near the historic district. My pulse quickened as another realization settled over me. Ethan had not merely collected information. He had built a trail. Every document inside the safe seemed designed to lead me somewhere. To someone. The question was why. Before I could consider the answer, my phone vibrated on the desk beside me. The caller ID displayed a name I had not seen in nearly 18 years. Rachel Parker. For a moment I wondered if exhaustion was making me hallucinate. Then the phone rang again. And suddenly I realized this mystery was far from over. The phone continued ringing while I stared at the screen in disbelief. Rachel Parker. After nearly 18 years of silence, her name had appeared at the exact moment I discovered evidence that Ethan had been quietly investigating. Our shared past. My hand trembled as I answered. For a second neither of us spoke. Then I heard her voice. Older, calmer, but instantly recognizable. Lauren, she asked softly. I closed my eyes. Rachel. The silence that followed carried nearly 2 decades of unanswered questions. Finally she spoke again. I was not sure you would answer. I was not sure you would call. Rachel released a nervous laugh. Fair enough. I glanced toward the open safe sitting beside Ethan's desk. Papers and photographs remained scattered across the surface. How did you get this number? I asked. Another pause. Actually, that is why I am calling. Something in her tone immediately captured my attention. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated before answering. About 3 weeks ago I received a package. My heart skipped. A package from who? I think from Ethan. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Rachel explained that a sealed envelope had arrived at her office shortly after Ethan disappeared. There was no return address. Inside she found a handwritten note and instructions not to contact me immediately. Ethan had apparently asked her to wait until a specific date before reaching out. That date was today. I struggled to process what I was hearing. Rachel, why would Ethan send you anything? She sighed quietly. That is the same question I have been asking myself. We spoke for nearly an hour. By the end of the conversation, one thing became painfully clear. Rachel was just as confused as I was. Ethan had left her only fragments. A note containing a few carefully chosen sentences. A photograph from years ago. And a single instruction. If Lauren contacts you first, tell her to visit the Savannah address. If she does not, call her yourself. The address. My eyes immediately drifted toward the paper I had found inside the safe. The bookstore in Savannah. Suddenly the coincidence disappeared. Ethan had coordinated everything. The realization sent a chill through me. This was not random. This was not a collection of old documents hidden by a paranoid husband. Ethan had built an elaborate trail long before he vanished. The next morning I drove to Savannah. The trip took a little over 2 hours. Rain clouds hovered above the interstate while questions crowded every corner of my mind. When I finally arrived, the bookstore looked exactly as I remembered. Small. Quiet. Nestled between 2 historic brick buildings. Inside, the scent of old paper and coffee filled the air. An elderly woman stood behind the counter. Before I could say a word, she looked up and smiled. Lauren Mitchell? My stomach dropped. How do you know my name? She reached beneath the counter and removed a small sealed envelope. A gentleman asked me to hold this for you. I stared at the envelope. Ethan's handwriting covered the front. My pulse thundered in my ears as I accepted it. Beneath my name he had written a sentence that changed everything. If you are reading this, then you have finally reached the part of the story where the truth begins. For several minutes, I simply sat in my car outside the bookstore staring at the envelope in my hands. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. Another part was terrified of what I might find inside. Eventually curiosity won. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The first line stole the air from my lungs. Lauren, if you are reading this, Then you already know more than I ever intended you to know. I read the sentence twice before continuing. Ethan's words felt calm, almost conversational. There was no anger. No accusation. No bitterness. Instead, he wrote as though he were guiding me through a journey he had planned long ago. He explained that the bookstore was only the first stop. More importantly, he asked me not to make assumptions about his intentions. People often confuse silence with ignorance. One line read. They are rarely the same thing. My hands tightened around the paper. The letter continued with directions to a small historical inn several blocks away. Ethan claimed something important had been left there years earlier. I folded the letter and drove across the historic district. The inn overlooked a quiet square lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Inside, an elderly manager greeted me warmly. The moment I introduced myself, her expression changed. Without hesitation, she retrieved a small wooden box from a locked cabinet behind the desk. He told me you would come someday, she said. My pulse immediately accelerated. When? I asked. About 4 years ago. 4 years. The number echoed through my mind. Ethan had planned this at least 4 years before he disappeared. Back in my room, I opened the box. Inside was another envelope, a key, and a folded photograph. The photograph showed Ethan standing alone beside a waterfront railing. Written on the back was a date from 3 years earlier and a simple message. Not every secret destroys a marriage. Sometimes the fear of telling it does. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. The key belonged to a safety deposit box at a local bank branch. Before leaving the inn, I called Rachel. She answered immediately. After listening to everything I had discovered, she remained silent for several seconds. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Lauren, there is something I never told you. My stomach tightened. Rachel explained that nearly 5 years earlier, Ethan had contacted her directly. Not to confront her. Not to threaten her. He had simply asked to meet. According to Rachel, they spent nearly 2 hours talking over coffee. Ethan never raised his voice. He never acted angry. He only asked questions about the past and listened carefully to the answers. When the meeting ended, he thanked her and left. Rachel never heard from him again. I could barely process what she was telling me.
Ethan had met Rachel.
Ethan had known. Ethan had spoken with the one person connected to the secret I spent years hiding. Yet somehow he had returned home afterward and continued living beside me as though nothing had changed. As evening settled over Savannah, I sat alone looking at the key resting in my palm. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. But one thing was becoming impossible to ignore. This was no longer a mystery about Ethan's disappearance. It was a mystery about the man I thought I had known for 15 years. The following morning, I stood outside the bank for nearly 10 minutes before gathering enough courage to walk inside. The key Ethan had left behind felt heavier than it should have. Every discovery over the previous few days had revealed another layer of a man I thought I understood completely. By now, I was no longer searching for evidence of betrayal. I was searching for an explanation. The bank manager escorted me into a private room after verifying my identification. When she opened the safety deposit box and left me alone, I stared at the contents in silence. There were no stacks of money, no hidden legal documents, no shocking financial secrets. Instead, the box contained a leather journal, several sealed letters, and a small map of Charleston marked with handwritten notes. I opened the journal first. The earliest entry was dated almost 9 years earlier. Ethan described ordinary moments from our life together. Weekend dinners, holidays with family, walks along the harbor. At first, the entries seemed completely normal. Then I reached an entry that changed everything. Today I learned something Lauren has been afraid to tell me. I wish she knew that my first reaction was sadness, not because of what happened, but because she has been carrying the burden alone. I stopped reading. My eyes filled with tears. Ethan had known for nearly a decade. Yet he never confronted me, never demanded explanations, never used the knowledge as a weapon during disagreements. The realization left me shaken. I continued reading. Over and over, Ethan returned to the same theme. He wrote about trust, about fear, about the strange ways people protect themselves. One sentence remained in my mind long after I read it. The secret itself never frightened me. The loneliness behind it did. I closed the journal and looked at the remaining contents. One of the sealed letters had Rachel's name written across the front. Another carried mine. A third contained only a date scheduled for 6 months after Ethan's disappearance. The map drew my attention next. Several locations around Charleston had been circled in blue ink. Each place represented a meaningful memory from our marriage. The waterfront restaurant where we celebrated our 10th anniversary. A public garden where we spent Sunday mornings. A small bookstore where Ethan once surprised me with a first edition of my favorite novel. Written beside the final location was a note. The answers become clearer when you revisit the places where your life changed. Hours later, I began following the map. At each location, I discovered something small that Ethan had arranged years earlier. A letter stored with a trusted friend. A photograph hidden inside a book. A note tucked behind a framed picture. None of the messages contained accusations. Instead, they felt like pieces of a conversation Ethan had never been able to start while we were together. By sunset, I found myself standing on the pier where Ethan had proposed 15 years earlier. Attached beneath a weathered wooden bench was the final note for that day. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The message was brief. Lauren, if you have reached this point, then you finally understand something important. I was never trying to discover your secret. I was trying to understand why you believed I could not handle the truth. For the first time since Ethan vanished, I realized this entire journey might not be about what he knew. It might be about what he wanted me to learn. That night, I returned home carrying the weight of everything I had learned. The house felt different now. Not emptier because Ethan was gone, but fuller somehow, as if pieces of him were still guiding me through every room. I sat at the kitchen table with the journal, the letters, and the map spread out before me. For hours I reread passages I had previously rushed through. This time I noticed something I had missed. Ethan never wrote as a victim. He never described himself as someone who had been deceived. Instead, he wrote like a man trying to solve a puzzle. A puzzle built from love, fear, and silence. Near the back of the journal, I discovered several entries that had been folded together. The dates all came from the same year. 9 years earlier. The year Ethan first learned the truth. My pulse quickened as I began reading. One entry described the exact day he uncovered the secret. He never explained how he found out. He only wrote about what happened afterward. Today I learned something that could change everything if I allow it to. The strange part is that my first instinct was not anger. It was curiosity. How long has she been carrying this alone? Another entry appeared a few weeks later. I watched Lauren laugh with friends tonight. No one in the room would ever guess how carefully she protects parts of herself. The world assumes secrets are signs of dishonesty. Sometimes they are signs of fear. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by a mixture of guilt and admiration. For years I had underestimated Ethan. I assumed that if he ever learned the truth, our marriage would collapse. Instead, he had responded with empathy I never gave him the chance to show. The next morning I met Rachel for coffee. It was the first time we had seen each other face to face in nearly 2 decades. Time had changed both of us. The nervous energy of our younger years had been replaced by something quieter and more reflective. We spent nearly an hour discussing everything Ethan had left behind. Eventually, I showed her several journal entries. Rachel read them carefully before setting the pages down. "Lauren," she said softly, "I think you have been looking at this the wrong way." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "You keep asking when Ethan learned the truth. But maybe that is not the important question anymore." I knew she was right. The evidence already answered that question. Ethan had known for nearly a decade. The real mystery was why he chose this path instead of confronting me directly. Before we left, Rachel handed me something unexpected. A folded letter. My heart immediately began racing. "What is this?" I asked. "Ethan gave it to me after our meeting 5 years ago," she explained. "He told me not to open it. He said it belonged to you someday." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The message inside was short, far shorter than the others. Yet somehow it carried the greatest impact. "If you are reading this, then you finally understand that I was never investigating your past. I was preparing you for a future where you would no longer need to hide from it." Beneath the sentence was a final address. And unlike every clue before it, I immediately recognized where it led. It was the place where Ethan and I first met. The address led me to a small waterfront restaurant overlooking Charleston Harbor. The building looked almost unchanged from the day Ethan and I first met there 15 years earlier. I parked across the street and sat in my car for several minutes, overwhelmed by memories. I could still picture the nervous smile he gave me when he accidentally spilled coffee on the edge of our table. I could still remember the conversation that lasted 4 hours and somehow felt like 20 minutes. Back then, everything seemed simple. Back then, neither of us carried the weight of secrets. Eventually, I stepped inside. The restaurant manager greeted me with surprising familiarity. Before I even introduced myself, he nodded as though he had been expecting me. "Lauren Mitchell?" he asked. My heart immediately sank. I was beginning to recognize the pattern. Ethan had prepared every step of this journey long before his disappearance. The manager guided me to a private dining room overlooking the water. Waiting on the table was a sealed package. Ethan's handwriting appeared across the front once again. This time, however, there was also a note attached to the outside. "This is the final piece." My hands trembled as I sat down. For several moments, I simply stared at the package. Part of me feared that opening it would end the only connection I still had to Ethan. Eventually, I broke the seal. Inside was a thick letter and a flash drive. I unfolded the letter first. The opening sentence immediately brought tears to my eyes. "Lauren, if you are reading this, then you have finally reached the point where I can tell you the truth." I took a deep breath and continued reading. Ethan explained that his disappearance had not been an accident. He had not been harmed. He had not been kidnapped. He had chosen to leave. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Yet as painful as the revelation felt, the explanation that followed changed everything. Ethan described spending years watching me carry guilt over a secret that no longer needed to control my life. He wrote about seeing fear behind my smiles and hesitation behind my confidence. Most importantly, he explained that he never wanted our marriage to become a courtroom where the past was placed on trial. Instead, he hoped I would eventually learn to accept every part of myself. Then I reached the section that completely transformed my understanding of everything. Ethan revealed that he had been diagnosed with a serious medical condition nearly 2 years earlier. It was not immediately life-threatening, but it forced him to reconsider what truly mattered. During that period, he began creating the trail of letters, photographs, and clues. Not because he planned to disappear forever, because he wanted to ensure that if circumstances ever separated us, I would finally confront the truth I spent years avoiding. My vision blurred as I continued reading. Near the end of the letter, Ethan wrote something I will never forget. "The greatest misunderstanding of our marriage was never your secret. It was your belief that I needed a different version of you in order to love you." Tears rolled down my face. Every assumption I had made about Ethan had been wrong. For years I believed the truth would destroy us. Instead, he had spent nearly a decade proving that it never could. Then I noticed a final instruction written at the bottom of the page. It directed me to plug the flash drive into a computer. According to Ethan, one final message remained. And unlike everything else he had left behind, this one had been recorded only days before he vanished. It took me nearly an hour before I found the courage to view the recording. I returned home that evening carrying the flash drive as carefully as if it were something fragile. In a way it was. Whatever remained inside that file represented the final words Ethan had chosen to leave behind. I sat alone in his office, connected the drive to my laptop, and opened the video. The screen flickered for a moment before Ethan appeared. He was sitting on our back porch overlooking the harbor. The same place where we had spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing. Seeing him again after months of uncertainty felt overwhelming. For several seconds I simply stared at the screen while tears filled my eyes. Then Ethan smiled. It was the familiar smile I had known for 15 years. Calm, warm, reassuring. "Hello, Lauren," he said. "If you are watching this, then you have completed a journey I hoped you would never need." His voice immediately brought me back to countless ordinary moments we had shared together. Ethan explained that he recorded the message shortly before leaving. He confirmed once again that his disappearance had been intentional. Not because he wanted to escape our marriage. Not because he wanted to punish me. He simply believed that some truths can only be understood when people are willing to face them on their own. Then he said something that changed everything. The person who needed forgiveness was never you. It was the version of yourself that spent years believing you were unworthy of being fully known. I sat frozen as the words settled into my heart. Ethan continued by speaking about Rachel. He explained that meeting her years earlier helped him understand an important part of my history, but it never changed how he felt about me. If anything, it helped him see how much fear I had carried into our marriage. Fear of rejection. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the life we built together. I wish you had trusted me with the truth, he admitted gently. But I also understand why you did not. There was no resentment in his voice, only compassion. Toward the end of the recording, Ethan revealed one final piece of information. He was alive, healthy, living temporarily in a coastal town several states away, while focusing on his medical recovery and personal reflection. He explained that he was not asking me to find him. He was not asking me to wait for him. Instead, he wanted me to choose my future freely for the first time in many years. Whatever comes next, he said, make sure it is based on honesty rather than fear. Then he smiled once more. And remember something I learned far too late. Love is not the reward people receive after becoming perfect. Love is what allows imperfect people to be fully seen. The recording ended. The screen went dark. Yet for the first time since Ethan vanished, I felt peace instead of confusion. A week later I met Rachel at a small waterfront cafe. We talked openly about the past, about Ethan, and about everything we had spent years avoiding. There were no dramatic declarations.
No impossible promises.
Only honesty. As we sat watching the harbor, I realized the mystery that had consumed my life was finally over. Ethan's greatest secret was never that he knew the truth. It was that he had understood it long before I understood myself. And in the end, the man I thought had disappeared had actually left behind the one thing I needed most. The courage to stop hiding.